supermodels and toys and punching kangaroos. Oh my. Hello friends, welcome back to the show. So glad to see you all once again. And if you're new here, thank you for stopping by. I think you're going to like what you see because here is the show where we talk about cartoons we grew up on in the 80s and 90s. If this sounds like something you might enjoy, then hop below and hit the subscribe button, click the thumbs up like button while you're at it, because today we're talking about the episode Obsession, which originally aired on November 14th, 1998.
I can't believe we're getting paid to do this.
I do have to admit, when this episode first started and I heard them talking about LL's new fashion line, I immediately had flashbacks to the episode My Girl and began to get a little nervous about how this episode was going to roll out. But when it was all said and done, it's pretty fun. It's got a lot of cool elements to it and brings back the Toyman into the mix, which is always a good time. So, but we'll talk all about that right after our 60-second Brainiac Bomb rundown of the episode. Give you a complete synopsis of the episode in 60 seconds or less. People bomb go off. I wish I could talk that fast. Jimmy and Clark are at a fashion show waiting for Darcy Mason to make her famous appearance. And when she does, then this astronaut and soldier and knight and cowboy come in and try to kidnap her. And Superman falls off. Clark Kent falls off a building. Superman comes in and beats up and blows up a bunch of, and they almost get away. And then Clark shows up at her apartment and goes, "Hey, listen, this isn't good. We got to protect you." A giant kangaroo comes in and starts punching things. We find out that this is all because the Toyman is behind this, and he wants Darcy back for himself. And so he eventually is able to get away with his little helicopter thing. And then Lana walks in on Darcy and sees her putting her face back on her robotic head. And she goes, "What's going on?" And Darcy beats her up and shows up to the Toyman and goes, "Hey, let's have this out. You can't have me back." And she's a toy that he created for himself. Superman shows up. He thinks that it's because that Superman wants this Darcy all for himself. They fight in this. I think I'm getting better. Maybe not. But Superman fights in this giant ninja fighting ring, and then Darcy and Toyman escape. However, we then later see Darcy getting on a train, and she picks up her suitcase that nobody else can lift. I'm getting close. You got to give me that much.
You work too hard, girl.
So this is the second episode in a row with Lana Lang, which I thought was interesting. Last episode obviously was with teenage Lana Lang, and now we have adult Lana Lang with the fashion line. And My Girl, last time adult Lana Lang was in the episode. My Girl is still currently the lowest ranked episode of the series for me. And so I didn't have a lot of hope for this episode, but I liked some of the way it was going. And there was a great little mystery that was starting to unravel about what's going on with Darcy, why is she acting this way, who are these people that are trying to capture her, or these robot people that were trying to capture her. And then we introduced the Toyman, which I thought was a great element because he's a fun character and his gimmick is fun. And yeah, he reminds me a little bit more of a Batman villain, and I like those gimmicks that the Batman villains have. But just in general, he added some new life into this episode that I think was really needed. But the robots that he sent to initially capture are not very good. I mean, we've talked about this before, but it seems that the challenge is always coming up with adversaries or villains for Superman to face off against that are challenging to him, and these robots weren't. I mean, one good strike and they blew up. But it makes sense because Toyman's making toys, and these are more toy soldiers than actual robot soldiers. But I don't feel like that's what this episode was about, which I think is what helped the episode. It wasn't about Toyman trying to build the biggest, baddest robot to take down Superman, although the boxing kangaroo was a pretty good face-off with Superman. But it was more about, for me, as the episode was going on, was trying to figure out what was going on with Darcy. What was her deal in all of this? Why is she being captured? And is this just an obsessed fan, indicated by the name, or who's really behind this? And that's where it got interesting.
I'm a big girl and I can take care of myself.
Although I do have to say, it was interesting when Superman was in her apartment. First of all, something a little creepy about that he scanned her apartment to see where she was at, figured out she wasn't in there, and then flew in through the window. You know, all her cupboards were bare and there was nothing there. And he jumped to the conclusion that, oh, she must not have a lot of personal items here for some reason. And I was seeing all this going, well, she left town. She doesn't live there anymore. She's gone. So it was an interesting jump in logic there. But it was also interesting that once again, we had to find an opportunity. Clark's there and the villain attacks, or the punching kangaroo. And the writers had to figure out a way of getting Clark Kent out of there so that he could come back as Superman to protect his identity but save the day. And I feel like we've resorted to a number of times of him getting knocked out of a window or falling into something or fell out of a car at one point. And it seems to be that's kind of the easy way in. But it brings up an interesting challenge that there is in writing Superman, that you have obviously the stories about Superman, but you have Clark Kent that's trying to do as much as he can on his own and not relying on Superman to do all this work, because it could have just as easily been Superman to show up at her apartment and go, hey, I'm here to protect you. I want to make sure everything's okay. But he's got Clark Kent doing that as if they're two different people. And kind of paints yourself into a corner a little bit to go, well, now we got to get Clark Kent out of there so we can bring Superman in. He can't just run into the bathroom and change and pop out as Superman. That's just another one of those interesting, unique challenges that they have with Superman that you don't really have with other heroes. Then, as the story goes on, you see Darcy back in her dressing room and Lana comes in and she's repairing her face, that she attacks Lana. Then I started feeling like, well, who's the villain here? You know, you got Toyman, who's apparently the villain, but Darcy's attacking Lana, who was just checking in on her. So it kind of introduced this other interesting dynamic. And then as it went a little further, I started to question sort of the Mad Hatter paradigm, which is, what did Toyman do wrong? And more so in this one, I get a lot of the arguments about Mad Hatter being like, well, you can't just force Alice to love you. But here, Toyman says a line about,
well, I built her and she's mine.
And there's something kind of true about that. Like she is not a real person. He created this robot to love him or be his companion or whatever the relationship is there. It's kind of true. Like, what is he doing wrong by getting his own property back? You know, just like the kangaroo, that's his kangaroo. Yeah, it was doing bad things, but still his property, and it could be confiscated for doing, you know, for him sending it out to do bad stuff. That's not a great analogy, but the point is that he made Darcy for his own, and she escapes or developed her own thoughts and plans and left. It's still his property. Like she's not a real person. She is a robot created by his own hands. So, you know, maybe he goes about things the wrong way, but I was even trying to think, even in that initial scene where he sends these other toy robots out to retrieve her, and it was only because they were fighting back with other people and Superman fighting them. Who was Toyman harming by going to get his own robot back? And it wasn't like she was going rogue and shooting a bunch of people. It wasn't until later that she kind of fought back against Lana, but prior to that, she was just a model having a career and a life for herself, and he came back to get her back. He's sort of within his rights, I guess.
It's not part of your program, my love. You don't have the circuitry.
Sort of reminds me a little bit of Growing Pains, where this little girl that was part of Clayface gets out and he's trying to retrieve her, and Robin's trying to stop that raises these weird moral questions. I guess it's possible in the realm of science fiction that this robot that was created developed their own personality or their own consciousness, however you say that word, to develop its own personality or AI intelligence to create a cause or a case to say, hey, leave this person alone. They've now developed a choice that they don't want to be with you. So you can't just take them. They're no longer a property or something you can own. But Really, when you think about it, it's just you build a stuffed up doll and it got away from you and you went to try to get it back and it said, no, I don't want to be with... These analogies aren't helping the case, but you get what I'm saying. It's a toy, not a person. Not to mention the element that if Toyman's so enamored and so wants this Darcy back, why don't he just build another one? Of course, then there wouldn't be an episode. But all that aside, I do really enjoy the character that's the headless cowboy with the lasso gun. I want to see him have a spinoff. He should be his own villain. He should escape from Toyman and go after Superman. I think that'd be a good matchup.
Don't tell me, Sheriff. I can guess. Superman?
So when it comes time to rank this episode, it's fun. It's got some good gimmicks. Toyman's a great villain. Darcy's kind of a mysterious character. It's not so much based on Superman punching things, which I think is good. But there is a major logic problem with this episode that once that thought entered into my mind that either A, Toyman just builds another one and this episode doesn't exist, or Superman goes, oh, this is your property, I guess you can have her back as long as you don't hurt anybody, that would have canceled out this episode. And so it's one of those stories that, and I don't know if that was talked about or discussed and they tried to ignore it or I'm reading too much into it, but it was sort of one of those elements that once I thought of that, it started kind of picking away at the reason for this story to exist. So for all those reasons, this episode falls at the number 20 spot of my favorite episodes so far. It falls just below Heavy Metal because Heavy Metal is the introduction of Steel, which is a fun character, and the way that he has to kind of help save the day and the metal versus metal kind of pairing is a very logical episode where this one isn't so much. But I do have it beating out Father's Day, which is sort of an important episode with how they tie it in with Darkseid and what he's doing and the dualities between Jonathan Kent and Darkseid's father, Calibec, and all that. But this episode, I think, just had a more fun gimmick to it. It doesn't win by much, but it does beat that episode out. So it's not that I think this episode is bad, but I just feel like they could have explained away this conundrum a little bit better in there. What do you think would have helped to make this episode better? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button. If you want to see more episodes like this, just hit subscribe. I have new episodes coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. And next up, I have the episode Little Big Head, so you don't want to miss that. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Andy Knode, and I'll see you soon.